to come from the bowels of hell.
The Dana Gould Hour.
Jungle worms and swamp rats run around your feet.
I fought a dog that killed the calf that ate the canary. What is truth?
And once again, welcome back.
Well, we're back. Summer is in full dudgeon and temperatures are creeping up into the low 100s. But enough about the Arctic. We've got a lot going on right here in LA. This is a very LA-centric episode of the show. The City of Angels has undergone a lot of turmoil in the past 2 years, like many cities in America and all over the world. It has a houselessness problem that is beyond the pale. Construction is running wild, but it doesn't seem to be for anything that anybody wants or particularly needs. And yet, it is still LA. And even the most dour prediction for the future is leavened with a glimmer of hope that somehow, someway, something decent might prevail. So ultimately, it's a story of hope. We have two fantastic guests. It's an old school episode. Karie Bible came to Los Angeles by way of Texas, fell in love with LA and its history, and submerged herself in that history by way of the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, where she has been giving tours for about 20 years now. She has amazing stories of both the living and the dead, and we are super happy to have her here today. Also, my old pal Allison Martino, a famed Los Angeles historian, she of the LA Conservancy, the Vintage LA Facebook group, and Vintage LA on Instagram, Allison Martino. I could talk to Allison all day, every day. She's the best, and she is also here. As for me, sign up for the Patreon. It keeps our show going. It's only $5 a month and you get some cool junk. Go to danagould.com. You like how I've whittled that promo down? Hanging with Dr. Z is gearing up for Season 2, and you can be a part of it. Our Kickstarter page goes live on July 5th. Just go to our website, hangingwithdrz.com. Doctor spelled out, hanging with DOCTORZ.com. Hangingwithdrz.com after July 5th, and you will be directed to our Kickstarter page. We have cool gifts for certain donation levels, and you can be a partner in Hanging with Dr. Z's second season. Hanging with Dr. DOCTORZ.com. That's dropping on July 5th. But in the meantime, it's on to our filthy business.
Tune in, it's a gas. It's the Dana Gould Hour podcast.
The Dana Gould Hour. Free and worth it.
Now, when you come to Los Angeles, you come to Hollywood, if you're traveling, from another part of the country, another part of the world, one of the things that you intend to do is you want to see movie stars. People assume that in Hollywood, they're at the counter at Schwab's, driving down Hollywood Boulevard in the convertible. And that rarely, if ever, happens. But there is one place that you can go to in Hollywood where I guarantee you can see movie stars any time of day, any day of the year, and that is the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. And my guest today has been giving tours of the Hollywood Forever Cemetery for 19 years, and hopefully we'll be doing it for 19 score more.
Hope so.
Please welcome my guest, Karie Bible.
This is the sound of my voice.
And Bible is your real name.
Bible is my real name, yes.
So if you had children, people would go, "Are there any little Bibles at home?"
I don't have kids at all, which the world can heave a collective sigh of relief. But it's funny. I was bullied a lot as a kid, as you could probably imagine. And
well, you said you grew up in Texas.
Grew up in Texas originally, and I was kind of.
I can't imagine a bully in Texas, but
it's true.
You'll have to take my word for it.
Yeah, and then I was kind of a weird kid, so last name Bible, a lot of stuff for people to pick on.
And your birthday is Halloween.
Halloween night. Yeah.
And your birth. Okay, let's unpack this because it's a lot. It's a lot. Your birthday is Halloween.
Yeah.
And your last name is Bible.
Yes.
And you give cemetery doors.
And I have 2 different colored eyes too.
Oh my God, you do.
Yeah.
How are we only now just meeting?
Can't make me up. It's all true.
My friend Candace Martellaro did the tour, and called me immediately and said, you have to meet this person. You have to meet. I was like, okay. And that's actually how I came to reach out. But so you grew up in Texas, and yeah, you're clearly you have a brown eye and a blue eye.
Yes.
What didn't plan on making this part of the conversation, but how does that happen?
I was born with blue eyes, and one morning I was 7 months old. My mom went in my crib, picked me up. I had a brown eye. Naturally, mom was a little freaked out.
Yeah.
No one on either side of my family has brown eyes that we know of. So countless doctors later, they said, we don't know what happened. We don't know. It just happened. So,
wow.
And then when I was 7 years old, a piece of brown appeared suddenly at the top of my blue eye. Yeah. And again, another round of doctors, but it stayed the way it is. So I wasn't technically born with it, but... and
it doesn't affect your vision?
Well, my left eye, I do kind of see better out of my left eye, and I do have different prescription levels for each eye, contact lens-wise. But I think that's normal, actually. Yeah, when I was 13, an eye doctor asked me if I wanted color contacts, so, quote, I could look normal like everyone else. And I was so incensed. I was like, why would I do that? Why would I do that?
Yeah, David Bowie has contacts to look like you. But how do you get right to the point? How is it that you like a lot of people, you moved to Los Angeles? Mm-hmm. What was your intention when you moved to Los Angeles? What did you hope to do? Did you want to be an actress? Did you want to be a writer? Or what brought you to LA?
Well, I'll start. I went to film school. When I was a little girl, I fell in love with classic Hollywood. I was about 5 or 6. My gateway drug was the Universal horror films.
Sure.
And
it is for many.
As it is for many. And I remember thinking, I want that. And I didn't know what that meant. I was a little kid, but I remember thinking, I'm not supposed to be in Texas. I don't belong here. And as a kid, there's nothing you can do about it. But I remember thinking...
I had a not dissimilar feeling in Massachusetts.
And I remember thinking, I've got to go to Hollywood. And I told my parents I was going to run away and come to Hollywood when I grew up. And I went to film school. I went to what was at the time called College of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Got a degree in film. I studied film production and film history. And the goal originally was to be like, I love Christine Vachon and her work. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to produce like smaller independent films. And I worked as an assistant at HBO. I worked at Miramax.
When did you work at HBO?
2002. Time is so fuzzy in my head right now. I'm so sorry. 2000 to about 2001-ish.
Okay.
I worked for Colin Callender as a long-term temp. Then I worked for an agent who represented screenwriters. I worked at Miramax. Mm-hmm. And then, that was wild.
Was that New York or out here?
LA, yeah. I was an assistant for the head of West Coast Public Relations. Okay. But I got laid off right around the time I turned 30. And you know how you have a big birthday, you kind of have these epiphanies about what am I doing with my life? And for me, I thought, well, I'm not really getting to where I want to go. I mean, I tried to work at companies that made the kind of films I cared about and loved, but I wasn't getting where I wanted to be, no matter what. And also, I wasn't, even though I saw a lot of people that were doing what I dreamed of doing, they didn't seem really happy. And I kind of thought like...
Yeah, that's funny. Well, I think that one of the things is that a lot of people in Los Angeles, especially in the industry... It's populated by a lot of people who want to be somebody else. It's populated by a lot of people who are trying to get to a point that they are not currently at.
Yes.
And you don't realize until too late in life that you're already there. Where you want to be is where you are. But people don't get that realization usually until they're in their 40s, 50s.
Well, I kind of had this at 30. I just thought, I'm not where I want to be. I'm not happy. I've seen people who do what I want to do. They don't seem happy. I need to do something else. And shortly before that, even when I worked at HBO, in fact, I visited Hollywood Forever, and I fell insanely in love with that place. I was like, I am just crazy in love with it.
Yeah.
And
it is, I think, as close as you can get to that feeling of like old Hollywood.
Yes.
And, you are not, you are, because of the nature of a cemetery, it doesn't change. And, they don't tear down a building because it's 10 years old.
exactly.
And you're literally surrounded by old Hollywood.
Quite literally, yes.
Yeah.
And I fell in love, and I thought, I wonder if they have a tour. And I asked around, and they didn't. And I thought, maybe that could be me. And so I met with Mark Wanamaker, who is an incredible film historian. He's a mentor.
I know that.
to me.
I know his name. I think I've emailed him about. What is the name of his?
Bison Archives.
Bison Archives, right? Sure.
And he's been a wonderful friend and mentor to me. He introduced me to Tyler Cassidy, who owns the cemetery. And I kind of pitched Tyler what I wanted to do and gave Tyler a sample tour and talked with him. And he said, go for it. And I gave my first public tour in February of 2002. So most of my adult life,
Wow.
I've been giving tours there.
And who did this? Are you employed by the cemetery?
No,
or
I'm like an independent contractor.
that works
So,
with the cemetery.
Yeah, and I do my own website and business cards and marketing and PR and all that stuff, and they just give me their blessing. And I have certain rules I have to follow, of course, but it's a joy because, I mean, I have another day job, don't get me wrong.
Right,
I
yeah,
have
yeah.
other stuff to pay the bills, but I love it so much. And a lot of these people at the cemetery were at the ground level of filmmaking
No
and the
pun
entertainment
intended.
business. No pun intended. Actually, pun intended. And they were artists. They were pioneers. They were innovators. They were moving the needle at the time.
Right.
And a lot of them, especially when sound came, they just kind of got cast to the side and discarded. And to me, I just want to help them be remembered and help their stories live on. And for me, one of the greatest joys ever is when people contact me after the tour and say, you know what? I had a great time. I'm going to look up these movies you talked about. I'm going to read these books you mentioned. A couple of summers ago, 2 teenage boys, admittedly the hardest demographic probably
imagine,
to
yeah.
reach, emailed me and said, hey, man, we're going to check out some of this stuff. And I was like, that is why I got out of bed today. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So,
well, that is the. I talked to Allison Martino in the other interview of this episode. That is the struggle of living in Los Angeles. Is there is so much incredible history to the city, and it seems like the people that are in positions of power in the city hate that idea. Like that if something is over 10 years old, it's gotta go.
I've been thinking a lot.
It's a constant struggle.
I've been thinking a lot about this because one of the side hustles that I do film history lectures for assisted living centers. Last month, I met a woman who has lived in Los Angeles since 1919. She's still alive. And I could have spent the whole day with her, actually. Right. She was fascinating. But I think in American culture, anyway, it's very ageist. And we have this
100%.
attitude, and they even say it in the movie The Artist, out with the old, in with the new. And I think there's such ignorance in that way of thinking because I think people that are older have experience, wisdom, stories, and buildings that are older. That is a part of our collective history, and that stuff matters.
Yeah.
And trying to educate people and make them realize that stuff matters it's an uphill battle, but it's one that Allison, myself, countless of us are trying to fight and to just make people realize that there is so much magic to be found in history and in fascinating stories.
One of the contributing factors to that is if the national spiritual belief of this country is capitalism. We are a very religious country. The religion is capitalism. And capitalism is dedicated to 18 to 34-year-olds. They are the people with disposable income, and that is who drives marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And I think if you're not in that window, you're just in the way. You know, if like, and somebody said a really interesting thing about how the film studios now, because of the streaming and the pandemic, and hopefully it will go back to theaters, but there's a belief that, and this was specific to the HBO Max Warner releasing all of their big ticket movies on streaming this year, was that the only audience worth going after is everyone. And if you can't get everyone, there's no point. And, you know, you get, and it's, hopefully it will swing back. It's really egregious at this point, but that's, I think, part of that. It's like, you know, we just want all of everything all the time. That's all we want. And it's not how it works.
Yeah, I agree.
So you go to have you ever gone to the Screen Actors Guild retirement home? Do you go up there a lot? No.
I haven't done that one yet. I mean, well, I've been up there for events. I haven't like lectured there. I'd love to do that, but I have definitely been there.
I would imagine that a lot of the people that you would be lecturing about are actually in the audience at the time.
Yeah. In fact, there was a woman who she passed away a few years ago. Her name was Mary Carlisle, and she was an actress in the 30s. And I went up there several times to see her, and it was so sweet. I'd get all dolled up in my vintage dress, and she'd hold my hand, and we'd sit together. Sweet. And I love older people. Again, I just think that, you know, American culture just sort of disposes or discards the people and things that are older, and
they're easier to fight. I know that.
I love elderly people. I have such a heart for them, and I have several friends that are seniors, and I just get so enriched out of spending time with them.
Oh, last night I was reading about the riots, the Sunset Strip riots in 1960. I think it was 1967, over Pandora's Box and the curfew. It was a big youth rebellion against the LAPD that took place on the Sunset Strip. And how can I will myself back to that? To see it and to be able to walk around a different time. It is just so fascinating to me. Like, you know, and I was a kid in the 70s, and I know that to people today, the 70s is a completely alien time. Like, they can't imagine what it must have been like. It was a terrible time for shirts. But you know, and having lived through that, like I can imagine what it was like. I mean, I was alive in 67, but I was 3. You know, just I would love to go back and just to walk around and see what it was like. I don't know if you ever read I think it's 1963 is the name of the book. It's the Stephen King book where the guy finds a way back to 1963 and decides to prevent the Kennedy assassination.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it doesn't work out as planned.
11/22/63. That's the name of it.
It's my favorite Stephen King book. It came out 5-10 years ago, and it's my favorite one.
A friend gave me this book called Letters of the Century, and it's letters written by not just famous people, but average, everyday, ordinary ones, which I've kind of found those more interesting, quite honestly. From 1900 up until the year 2000. It's like this book. Right. And when the pandemic first broke, I whipped out that book and turned it to the pandemic of 1918.
18, yeah.
And almost to the date, there was a letter in that book about a doctor, and he came back from the front in World War II, and he was in Massachusetts. And he's seeing all these young men returning from World War I that are getting the flu and dying and he's writing this letter, which I wish I could read it aloud right now to you. It's so visceral and graphic and gut-wrenching. And just reading that 100 years almost to the day, and then being in this now was really chilling.
And back then, you know, they had anti-vaxxers back then. They had but because of media, they were, you know, because of media and the internet now, every niche is allowed to hive up. And there's, and again, capitalism, there's a lot of money in whipping these people into a frenzy. And the fact that there's the fact that there's a profit involved justifies doing it, and that's how we got January 6th. The people that were telling them, nobody that was telling them that stuff believes it. I was talking to one of the major anchors of a cable news network, one of the major anchors, and he said, on a good night, I believe 60% of what I read on a good night. But it's just, a lot of it is just.
I still can't believe that happened. I believe it, but it was like living in one of those Purge movies.
Yeah, no, it really was.
It just was like, this can't be real. This is so shocking.
And I don't think you've seen the last of it.
I know. And I don't understand why.
Well, I'm glad I live in the People's Republic of California.
Same.
It was interesting. So if someone comes to Hollywood Forever Cemetery for a Karie Bible tour, it's called?
It's a cemetery tour, or Cemetery of the Stars.
Cemetery of the Stars. Not Graveyard, not the Graveyard tour. There was another tour it wasn't about Hollywood Forever.
Graveline.
Graveline.
Yeah. My friend Scott Michaels, I think, used to be involved in that.
And that's just basically going around LA showing you where people died.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's not what I do.
Showing you where the Black Dahlia was not really murdered.
Yeah. Mine is
where she did end up.
I call it Cemetery of the Stars. I do a couple of little spin-off tours on other topics at Hollywood Forever, but I do those by private appointment.
Right.
So, but the main one I do is Cemetery of the Stars. It's 2.5 hours, but I can reduce it if people want to book a private one that's a lot shorter. But we talk about architecture and history and the main stars there and hang out with clothes. it's a long tour, but it's really good and it's a lot of fun and it's very interesting. And
right. Yeah. And who are the people that what are the big stops on the tour?
Gosh, there's so many. Obviously, Griffith J. Griffith, Vampira, Darren McGavin, Mr. Blackwell, John Huston, DeMille, Adrian, Janet Gaynor, Marion Davies, Tyrone Power, Valentino, Judy Garland, Toto, Doug. I can keep going on and on.
Okay, let me. Griffith J. Griffith? I don't even know who that is.
He's the man who gave us Griffith Park.
Okay, no relation to D.W. Griffith.
No relation to D.W. Griffith that I know of. No.
Okay, and I think I always assumed Griffith Park came from D.W.
That's a
Griffith.
fascinating story. If you want to hear
in the way that Mulholland came from Owen Mulholland. Yeah, believe it.
Oh, Griffith.
Podcast is perfect time.
I'll make a long story short.
No, don't. We're on a podcast.
He was a very wealthy businessman, and he made a fortune in mine speculating. And
Griffith
Jenkins Griffith, and he donated a little over 3,000 acres of land to the city of Los Angeles on the condition it had to be a public park for people to enjoy, and that's how we got Griffith Park. And Mr. Griffith had issues. We all have them, but his were pretty big. He was an alcoholic and severely paranoid. I don't know what the exact diagnosis would be, but he somehow got it into his head that his wife was conspiring with the Pope to assassinate him.
Okay.
As one does.
One would say that he had a mental disorder that resulted in severe paranoia.
That could be said, yeah.
The alcoholism was his ham-fisted attempt to self-medicate.
Well, and back then it was a different
It was
world.
everybody, yeah. Well, people died in their 50s because they drank and smoked themselves to death.
Exactly. Well, his wife said, "You know what? You've been working really hard. Let's take a vacation." Right. So they got a hotel room near the beach in Santa Monica. Well, during their time there, his paranoia started just spiraling out of control. They went back to their room one night. He got very drunk, pulled out a gun, ordered his wife to get down on her knees by the bed, pulled out a gun, shot her. The bullet lodged into her eyeball. She would lose an eyeball. 50% of her face would be badly disfigured, but she lived. And this is 1903 when this happened. Suffice to say, this put an end to the marriage.
He shot her in the head.
Well, it ended up lodging into her eyeball, but yeah.
And she lived.
She lived in 1903. It's a medical miracle, to be honest, that she lived, but she did. And in spite of her staunch Catholic faith.
Somehow the skull prevented it from permeating her brain, I guess.
I don't know know the exact like forensics of the shot.
I want to know.
But, right. But in spite of her Catholic faith, she did seek a divorce, and she testified against him in open court.
That would be a great Catholic thing. He shot me in the face, but the vows of marriage.
But no, she got a divorce, and she wore this thick black veil to hide her disfigurement, but she raised it up so the jury could see. And she lived a while after that, and she died eventually and is interred at Calvary Cemetery in East LA. And there's a statue of Mr. Griffith at the edge of Griffith Park that people walk and drive by every day.
I see.
And I always wonder,
across the street from the fountain.
Yeah, and I always wonder how many people know this story and think about that story when they drive by, because I do.
Did he go to jail?
He did. He must have had the legal dream team of the day. He pled alcoholic insanity in his defense. He only served 2 years in San Quentin, and he was a free man. And he got out of prison wanting to, assume what he thought was his rightful place in Los Angeles high society.
Right.
But if people didn't like him a lot here before the getting drunk and shooting your wife in the head thing,
sure,
you can imagine how people felt about him afterward. So he kind of was a bit of a
It was like when OJ. It's like that scene in the OJ movie when the trial is over and he tries to make a reservation at like the Bel Air Country Club, and they're like, "Oh, we're full tonight."
Yeah, not the same return to life, but
Wow.
it's a really fascinating story.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
LA is so full of
Griffith
Jenkins Griffith. Mhm.
Yeah, and is that? I'm assuming that story is not on the plaque of the statue.
Yeah, I'm assuming not.
Shot his wife in the face.
Shot his wife in the head. But
I always imagine that. It's an interesting thing. I don't know if he produced it, but he was certainly there at the recording. The song "Imagine." That Phil Spector was heavily involved.
Lana Clarkson's at Hollywood Forever. She's in the Columbarium.
What's the Columbarium?
It's the dome. It's the big circular dome right behind and above the funeral chapel. It's gold with these beautiful peacocks painted on it.
Yes, I have been in it.
She's up there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was going to say good for her, but she should still be here, not there.
She should be here, and I think he did that. But yeah.
Oh no, there's no question.
No question that he did.
Yeah, whether it was intentional or not will never be known. Will never be known. So that I didn't know. You were saying that Vampira is a big stop. Now I'm obviously. I know a little bit about that.
You do. You've met her. You knew her.
Yeah. No, I not only met her and knew her, but I'm the reason I handled the arrangements for all.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Sure. Well, it was. I don't know, my pleasure, but it was my duty as her friend. And you're saying that that's a big stop on the tour.
Oh,
for people.
One of the things that I enjoy about what I do is seeing people's reactions to things. Mm-hmm. And whenever I take people to Vampira, they love it. They light up. And there's not a day that goes by I do not see at least one to several goth girls laying all over that grave, taking pictures. Every Halloween, it's covered in jack-o'-lanterns and vampire fangs. And she truly is a major cult icon.
Yeah, she really is. And I have to say it's greater than the sum of its parts, and it beguiled even her. It literally struck a nerve, and struck a nerve to find a look, to find an attitude. Morticia Addams does not look dissimilar to Vampira, but there is something, and they're both fictional characters. There's something about Vampira, I think. She's more overtly sexual than Morticia Addams was. I mean, that was Mila's design and intention. It struck a nerve. We've discussed this off the podcast. Her 100th birthday is coming up next year, and we're trying to get her a more get her a marker that's more worthy of her impact.
I'm really hoping that for her centenary in 2022, we can have some sort of an event or a ceremony, or it'd be awesome just to see a zillion Vampiras all circled around her.
Well, that's count on it. Is what I kind of feel. I kind of feel that she would like that. I remember I took her to see Plan 9 from Outer Space at the Cinerama Dome.
Oh wow!
Before it was the ArcLight, and this is in the '90s, and I think it was Halloween, and it was a late show, and I took her, and nobody knew who she was. Just by then, she was in her late 70s, mid 70s, and we just sat down and watched it. And when she came on screen, it was packed, and the place went bananas. And she just kind of chuckled and said, "Oh, there she is," which I thought was very sweet. But it was great to see her see the impact that it had, because the internet was just starting. She certainly didn't have it, and she was only tangentially aware of the impact that she had. So, what is the spiel that you give for that? And then Darren McGavin is also right by her. By design, I am sad to say.
Yeah, don't be. I talk about how she was, as far as I know, the first woman to host horror films on television.
First person
to host horror films on television.
Yeah.
How she was in Plan 9 from Outer Space. How she's a beloved pop culture icon. I mentioned that there are books on her. I've seen the documentary Vampira and Me, and she's an incredibly beloved
That's a nice piece.
Cult icon.
Yeah.
And that's what I talk about. I mean, it's hard when you have a 2.5 hour tour, because you can't spend long periods of time at any one grave. You kind of have to keep it moving. But
what are the ones that the people are like, when do we get to this? When do we get to this?
Vampira, Valentino, Judy Garland, Johnny Ramone.
What is the story of that? Like, I don't really know that much about Valentino, but he really galvanizes people as well.
Yes, he
All
does.
I know is that Bela Lugosi was originally intended to be the next Valentino, and he thought that Dracula was going to. He also thought that, and it didn't work out.
I love Bella so much.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So Valentino, you want to hear the story of Valentino?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Well, I have theories on like everything. And I have a theory that when a star dies, it's not just the loss of their life that we mourn, although it is partly that. It's not just the loss of their future creative output, although that's a factor. But I think what really hits us emotionally in the gut is what they symbolized in our lives, because it transcends just being a star, just being an athlete, just being,
Sure,
there's something
100%.
much greater than that.
Yeah.
And I think, so Valentino was born in Castellaneta, Italy, and he was 18 years old. He came to America, an 18-year-old kid off the boat. Didn't have money, was sleeping in Central Park. He was a good-looking guy, though.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, good-looking guy, knew how to dance. So he worked
Is this early 1900s?
This is 1900s, yeah. Okay. Worked as a taxi dancer.
Right.
And then, which basically meant wealthy ladies paid him to dance with them, which sounds, I know, genteel today, but a long time ago, not so much. This was a little risque. And then he wound up in Hollywood.
Not to be confused with Taxi Driver.
Yes,
which is
not
a guy
to be
that
confused.
goes insane and shoots Harvey Keitel.
Yes. So he wound up in Hollywood and in the burgeoning film business, and they really liked to stereotype at that time. Well, they still do now, but back then it was really bad. And so if you looked foreign or ethnic, you'd be the villain, the criminal, the lousy boyfriend. You'd be a negative trope, basically, oftentimes. So Valentino did several of these villain roles. But there was a woman named June Mathis. She was a screenwriter, a very powerful, talented screenwriter. She saw his performance in Eyes of Youth, which I've seen it too. He's like in a third of it. But he jumps off the screen. And when you see it, you just think, that guy's got something. He's very special. Well, she saw it and she insisted he get the lead role in Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which was this World War I epic she was writing. And
again, this is early 1900s.
This is 1921 when he got
okay.
Four Horsemen and made that film. And she insisted, and she got what she wanted. It came out. He does a tango dance scene. He romances a woman. He fights in World War I, my personal favorite film of his. And that film helped make him a star. His next film, that same year, The Sheik, made him an icon.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And women around the world went crazy for it. And I think there's several reasons. First off, he's really good looking. And I think he'd be even considered hot by our standards today.
Right.
He's also a great actor. But I think there's something more, because before Valentino, except for maybe Seisu Hayakawa, most of the male stars were the clean-cut, all-American
Yeah.
male. Valentino wasn't that.
Yeah.
He was very sensual. He was very exotic. He was unapologetic.
Was he called like it wasn't Latin, but it was that sort of the Latin lover stereotype,
Yeah,
the dark mysterious. And also, I mean, it was like, for then, Valentino was very exotic.
Very exotic.
Yeah.
And women just loved him. And his films typically had period piece sets and costumes and always a torrid romance in the script. And I could talk about him for hours, but long story short, the final year of his life was really hard. He was going through his second divorce. He was battling an ulcer. He was attacked in the press. He's got all sorts of stress because even rich, famous people have stress and problems too.
So yeah, by the standards of the 20s, Valentino was very exotic.
Yes.
And I know that women went crazy for him. Were men threatened by him? Like, because also like white men, like he was Italian.
Yes, yeah. I think they were
Which
actually.
for then was not cool. You know, it was even for then, it was like,
I think they were. And Valentino also kind of had a different sense of masculinity. Like he would wear like he wore these super elegant clothes, and he wore this like chain link bracelet called a slave bracelet. And he did stuff that American men felt was
sure,
ridiculous, or like I've heard stories that like Douglas Fairbanks was like openly rude to him. So I don't know. I mean, I've heard that, but
he came across as my dad would say, a little minty.
And he was so beloved though by women, and he was such a giant force in the pop culture of the 1920s.
Was he the first movie star?
No, he wasn't the first movie star by any means. And but he was just so unique because there'd never been anybody like him before. There never has been since, actually. So the last year of his life,
Eric Estrada.
So the last year of his life, he's battling an ulcer. He's going through a second divorce. He's been attacked in the press. He's got a lot of problems. He's dealing with a lot of stress.
And this is late
1926. He goes to New York, and he was promoting The Son of the Sheik because they made sequels, even in silent film.
Sure.
And he fell ill of a perforated ulcer. And he died at only 31 years old.
See, I had no idea.
And there had been celebrity deaths before Valentino, but there'd never been one quite like this one. Over 10,000 people lined the streets of New York to see his body lying in state. A riot broke out. The police were called in. They brought him by train from New York to Los Angeles, and Italian immigrants would go to the train stations around the country to watch that train pass through. And I had a lady on my tour a few years ago tell me her relatives did that. Really? And if you think about it, again, as I was talking about, I think it's not just a star or a good-looking talent. They symbolize something. And I think for a lot of women, he symbolized love, romance, passion, excitement that maybe they didn't have. And for a lot of Americans, I think he represented hope. Because if you think about it, he came over here, a teenager, fresh off the boat from Italy with nothing.
No, he's the American dream.
He's the American dream. And he died one of the most successful, beloved, celebrated people. And I think it's not a stretch to think that people could have been at that train station saying, you know what, guys? He can make it in this country. Maybe we can too.
Yeah, and that's the thing about that as a sidebar. I mean, that belief is very indicative of the American ethos. And you know, it's like people in America don't view themselves as poor; they view themselves as not rich yet. That everybody lives with the belief that they can go as far as they are talented or what have you. It's not true. The system is rigged.
As Valentino died, he didn't have a lot of money at all. In fact, there was no money to bury him.
Really?
Because, which it kind of surprises.
Is that why he was in state so long? They just kept dragging him through cities because they couldn't
it wasn't
put
that.
him in the ground?
They brought him to Los Angeles, and then they figured out he was going broke. And people always ask me, well, how can that happen? He's a big star. Well, the thing is, a lot of creative people don't always have business sense. Now, Fairbanks did, Pickford did, but a lot of them didn't. And they spent money hand over fist, houses, cars, boats, furs, yachts, whatever. They didn't think it would come to an end. And in fairness...
By the way, that's not changed.
That's not changed.
I don't know if you've ever seen the show Cribs.
Yes. And in fairness, they did not know the Great Depression was coming. They did not know sound was coming.
Yeah.
And given the pandemic, I always say lately on the tours, I think we can now relate to a massive global event coming along that basically yanks the carpet out from under everybody and upends your entire life.
Yeah.
And I think we can all kind of understand that. So there was a sense of, there's no money. Okay, now what? Well, Gene Mathis, the great screenwriter who'd really helped his career considerably and wrote several films for him, she said, look, I've got some graves in Hollywood at the cemetery. They are paid for. Let's put him in one. We'll figure something else out later. Later did not happen. Gene Mathis collapsed and died of a massive heart attack on a New York street 11 months later. She was about 39 years old. So the buck stopped right there.
Wow.
And Valentino rests for eternity in what was originally intended to be a temporary borrowed crypt. This is a true story, too. A few years ago, I was giving a tour, and I had a big group, pre-pandemic, obviously. And there's a young girl, and as I'm doing my Valentino spiel, tears start pouring down her face. And she just shoves her way out of the crowd and runs out of the building. And I'm standing there in my head thinking, oh my God, what did I say that is upsetting? And I could tell she had a boyfriend with her. So I pulled him aside for a minute, and I said, is it something I said? Is she okay? And he goes, oh, no, man. Anytime Valentino's name comes up, she gets real emotional. She'll be all right. Don't worry. She was about 20 years old. So you've been dead 90-something years, and 20-year-old girls just cry and run out of a building. It's...
Well, and when you say run out of the building, so he's in a crypt.
He is in a crypt, and it's the Cathedral Mausoleum at Hollywood Forever.
Right. Wow. There is, and wasn't, and I believe Bela Lugosi was billed as the next Valentino, if I'm not mistaken.
I think a lot of men were sort of built up as
they
that.
tried to be,
that was kind of a positioning thing they were trying to.
Sure, yeah.
But you can't ever replace someone like. Can't ever replace someone like Valentino, and Bela was a whole different type, foreign, and he was came to Hollywood, and he was exotic and had an accent.
Yeah.
Very sexual, very sensual, very different.
Right.
So I can see where people would have kind of tried to make
that
that
was,
comparison.
Part of the reason he turned down Frankenstein was he was like, no. I'm a romantic lead. I'm not going to,
I have such a soft spot in my heart for him because that was the first film I ever saw. And that's the reason I went to film school, the reason I do the tour, the reason, like, if you like or dislike my work or anything I do, blame Bela because he's where it all started.
Again, like Vampira, there's something about Bela Lugosi that galvanizes people, that fascinates people more than Boris Karloff. There's just something about Bela Lugosi that strikes a nerve with people. The other two that you mentioned that I wanted to talk about briefly and was Judy Garland. Yeah. Now, what is the? Is it her drug addiction? Like what is it about Judy Garland that people just go are obsessed with?
I could talk about all this stuff for hours, but with Judy,
you do for a living.
Not my full-time living, mind you, but yes, I do a lot that. The thing about Judy is that it transcends. Okay, so Judy hated the narrative that her life was this tragic hot mess. She hated that narrative.
Right.
And she used to say that's really not true. I've had a good life. She would say she hated the poor little tragic, star. Her kids hated that narrative. Mm-hmm. So I do not go into it on the tour because there's two reasons why. First off, it's pretty common knowledge, a lot of the backstory.
Right.
And secondly, if she hated that narrative and her children hated it, it doesn't honor them to stand at her grave and recount it.
True.
But what I'm going to say is this is what touches me. First off, her artistry. She can sing a song that will break your heart into 1,000 pieces.
She was sort of, she had a, I liken her, like, I'm more prone to be listening to the Pixies than Judy Garland, but, and we all know they toured together. She had a sort of the American Edith Piaf, like she painted off that palette.
Perhaps, but I think Here's what I think is the reason. First off, just the talent. Like I say on the tour, there are some stars that are very much of their time, and there are other stars that are just timeless. They're forever. And Judy is timeless.
Yeah.
She's forever. And also, what I also say is, regardless of whatever pain and heartache and difficulty she had going on behind the scenes, and there was a lot, she overcame it. When she got on that stage, when she got on that set, when she got on that radio mic or wherever, she gave 100,000% of what she had to entertain the world. And I think for a lot of people that have been struggling with their own heartaches, their own problems, their own difficulties in life, she represented, and I try to distill this, she represented hope that you can overcome your problems. You can dredge up joy and happiness in spite of the pain that can envelop you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason that she is so beloved. I think it's the movies, the talent, and that.
You know, when you
be honest.
when you put it that way, you know who who has a not dissimilar arc is Kurt Cobain. Because obviously because he died young, he died by his own hand, but there's also like that guy was in pain, and he turned it into art that touched people.
Yeah. And it's been powerful to see the reaction. I've had people walk to the crypt because she's the final thing on the tour.
Right.
When we first got her, I thought, I'm going to have to redo the whole tour. And I thought, no, I can't start the tour
What do
with
you mean
her.
When we first got her, what do you...
Okay, that's a long story too. Everything's a long story around
Right,
here.
that's good. But it brings up a point about the Hollywood Forever Cemetery that I wanted to bring up. So
Okay.
how is it that you got Judy Garland?
Acquired Judy.
Right.
Well, when Judy died in 1969 in London, she was 47. She was on husband number 5. He barely knew her. They'd barely been married long at all. And he wound up making the decisions about what was going to happen. And he had Judy interred at Ferncliff Cemetery in upstate New York. Well, one of the issues with that is that there's no room for the kids. And her 3 children, Liza Minnelli, Lorna Luft, and Joe Luft, they decided, you know what, we want to be with our mom someday. And they made the decision to have Judy disinterred from Ferncliff and reinterred at Hollywood Forever. And that went down January of 2017. And I was like on gag order for 6 months. And then I wasn't really supposed to talk about it. And then June, well, it was kind of a...
So there was a plane...
Yeah,
that
there was a
flew
plane. Yeah.
in 2017 with Judy Garland's
Yes.
coffin on it.
In
her remains.
That is true. Yeah.
And then she was privately, quietly reinterred, or
Well,
was it a big deal?
basically, she was privately, quietly reinterred, and I think that one of the reasons is the kids. I can't imagine what it would be like to share your parent with the entire world. That must be a really weird head trip.
Sure.
And kind of hard emotionally. So I think, again, you'd have to ask the people that dealt with it directly at the cemetery.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I would think that maybe they just wanted a little time with their mom without the prying eyes of the rest of the world. So I wasn't posting about it or making
Yeah,
it. I was kind of trying to, they had black cloth all over the windows of that area. And it was kind of a discreet thing.
Is she
And then-
interred interior or exterior?
she is interred in the Judy Garland Pavilion, which is a section of the... I'll show you. But
Yeah.
anyway, so what happened is June...
Please tell me it's located just over the rainbow. We'll be right back.
June 10th of 2017, that's her birthday, we had a private ceremony, invitation only, in that little pavilion. And then that night, they showed The Wizard of Oz. And after that, I was allowed to talk about it and put her on the tour. And I thought, I can't start the tour with her because... you can't, then it's downhill. Valentino's kind of the halfway mark. So I figured you save the best for last. So Judy's the final stop on the tour. But I've had people walk in there and just break down crying. I've had people walk in there and just burst out singing at the top of their lungs. And and there's also a lot of beveled glass in that pavilion. And when the sun is just right, at just the right intensity, it will hit that beveled glass and cast rainbows all over the floor.
Oh, that's
So
lovely.
it's really beautiful. And honestly, I saw it as a great homecoming because Judy had a sense of humor, which people normally don't talk about. She was very funny and witty. And I think she would laugh. She'd be like, really? Dead for decades and making a comeback. Like, I think she would find this hysterically funny. But I think a lot of her fans are going to get to Hollywood Forever as opposed to maybe upstate New York. So I see this as an epic homecoming, an epic celebration. Next year marks her centenary. So I'm already kind of gently lobbying the cemetery to do a big Judy Garland festival of some kind. So
I remember when I was dealing with the people at Hollywood Forever, and it might have been the person that we spoke about earlier. They were saying that they wanted to get Jim Morrison because apparently, and this is my understanding, I could be wrong, that the graves in Père Lachaise cemetery are leased.
it's different over there. Yeah, I was in that cemetery one day and I saw in Paris and I saw a sticker in French and it was red and white and it said abandoned in French in big letters on the grave on this sticker.
Yeah.
Which I'd never seen that before. That was strange.
And that it was just, but I always thought that was a weird story that like the cemetery game and like they wanted to get a celebrity from another cemetery.
I don't know. I wouldn't see it as like a poaching situation by any
No,
means,
not at all.
but-
No, I didn't. I wasn't implying it was poaching.
Oh,
I was
okay,
just
okay.
saying, I wasn't implying it was poaching. I just thought it was fascinating. Like, he's, and you know, in terms of Jim Morrison, certainly it seems like he's much more intrinsic to Los Angeles than Paris. Even as a kid in high school, when I read "No One Here Gets Out Alive," the Jim Morrison book, which every white kid in high school had to read in the 70s and 80s. It was mandatory. I thought it was despicable that they spray painted all the graves around him. It's like, somebody's grave, dude. It's not about you.
When I visited his grave in Paris a few years back, they had bicycle racks all around his grave to try to keep people from it because there was so much vandalism on it. I don't know why the people do that.
Yeah, I don't get it.
I cannot understand that for the life of me.
Yeah, it's just like he was about. It's like. Yeah, I can't. But it's called missing the point completely. But it's also like, you know, it would be interesting if he was brought to Los Angeles, but also I wouldn't want that in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. You know, you don't want just all that spray painting nonsense.
Well, they have security there, so that would very quickly be squashed. But.
Yeah, but it's I never understood, and again as a teenager, I'm like, what are you doing? And as I said, I grew up next door to a cemetery. My address was Cemetery Street.
That's awesome.
I rode my bike around. My brothers and I and my friends and I would go. There was the park. There was a town park, and there was the cemetery. And the cemetery was closer. So 9 times out of 10, like, where you want to go? Want to go play in the cemetery? All right. It was like, do you want to go to the park? Do you want to go to the pond? Or do you want to go to the cemetery? Like, those were like, what do you want to do?
Yeah, that's how my brother and I learned to ride our bikes.
Yeah,
my dad took us there bike riding.
I learned to ride my bike in the cemetery.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, same thing. And when I was a kid, Dark Shadows was big. So we would go play Dark Shadows in the mausoleum at the cemetery.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was very, very strange. But celebrities do have that weird power over people. I remember I was with my mother when the news that Elvis Presley died broke.
Yeah.
And she was, you know, of that generation. My mother's from the South. She's from Virginia. And it wiped her out. I think it was the first time I ever saw her cry.
Oh, wow.
You know, it just wiped her out. And that would be, so there is a weird, and it's not really about the person. I think it's more, you know, it's more like a Valentine to that time in your life when that person's work was important to you.
Or what they meant to your life.
Yeah, what they meant to your life.
Like
it's like, exactly. It's like Mila Nurmi, I know, doesn't have an emotional connection to goth girls. at all. I mean, she understands the affinity, but she would say about them when we would drive around and she would see a goth girl like on Melrose, she would go, she would either say there's another one or there she goes, because she knew that they were obsessed with her character that was not her.
Well, I think it's the, I'm sorry.
No, that was it.
I think it's the power of the image because,
Yeah.
like, I know so many people that, and this shocks me, they've never seen a Marilyn Monroe film, but they gravitate to the image.
Yeah.
How many people have tattoos of her that haven't watched the movies because the image of her, you know,
Sure.
and that what that image means and represents. Louise Brooks, same thing. There's a lot of
Yeah,
stars
Louise
out
Brooks
there
is a big
that
one, yeah.
that the image is so much more well known than the person or the work. So that's a whole nother, you know, conversation. But yeah, I think Vampira, there's definitely a lot of that too, because the image of that sassy, sexy, gothic woman is, I
Yeah.
think, very alluring to people.
Yeah, it's actually the flip side of the Marilyn Monroe image. It's actually the other side of that coin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
She's the Veronica to Marilyn's Betty.
That makes absolute sense.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the people who come to see Johnny Ramone, who has one of the more eye-catching markers in the cemetery.
Dee Dee's there too. Yeah, it's interesting. One day, a lady came to take my tour, and she had a Ramones T-shirt on, and she'd announced that to me that she'd just gotten off a flight from New Zealand. And we get to Dee Dee's not officially on the tour because there's just so many people on it already. But she saw Dee Dee's grave, and she said, "I have to leave the tour right now. I have to spend time with Dee Dee." And then she started crying and just sat on Dee Dee's grave for a long time and caught up with the tour later. Like, I've had people just fly from all around the world to come there to see that person's grave. And if you think about it, there's a lot of these people you're never going to get to meet. So
Sure.
this is as close as you get. And this is kind of the period at the end of the sentence. This is where their earthly journey ended.
Yeah.
So there's something so incredibly profound about standing in the spot where that journey came to an end.
Sure.
In this
sure.
world.
Yeah.
So-
yeah, and to be in the same place.
That they were,
Yeah.
or are.
Yeah. That's why I'm and someone said that you have a plot.
I do. I acquired it during the pandemic. I did because I thought about it a lot. Obviously, I think about mortality anyway. It's kind of an occupational thing. But I thought, you know, my whole family's 3,000 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
And if something happened to me, that they'd be in quite a mess. You know, and I've known a lot of film history people over the years that they died without family, without a will, without,
Sure.
and just the mess that can ensue.
Yeah.
Priceless research and film history items are thrown in a dumpster, put on eBay, or just chaos, you know? And I thought, well, why not minimize that chaos as much as can be minimized? So, yeah, I kind of signed off on my own cremation order. That was a little weird, but yeah.
Yeah. I do want to be cremated, but I want to be coughed into the face of my enemies. I don't want to be interred anywhere.
Okay.
If people, now that LA, today is LA is reopened, today, if people are the tours are resuming.
Well, I've been very fortunate. I've been able to operate for about 50% of the pandemic because the tour is about 95% outdoors.
Yeah.
And I've been wearing a mask and a voice amplification device.
Right.
So, and I've been keeping the groups really tiny. So I've been incredibly fortunate and I've been able to operate for about half the time this has been going on.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, I can do full capacity now. And cemeterytour.com is my website.
Cemeterytour.com. And what is the Moonlight Tour?
Well, there's a night tour that I do usually once or twice a month, and it's sort of a moonlit walk through the cemetery. And we talk about different areas in the cemetery and different people that I simply can't get to during the daytime, either for logistical reasons or simply a matter of access.
Right.
So it's kind of a very different experience. I started doing that during the pandemic, actually, because I thought, well, they couldn't have movies for a while. They couldn't have concerts. And if you are there for those events, you're there with thousands of people. I thought, well, what if you were there with like 10 people? What would that feel like?
Right.
So I am very grateful that I get to do those sometimes as well. It's just a very different experience.
Right. Yeah, that would be the one that I would be more prone to do. Plus, it's cooler.
Yes, it's like 100. I still do these, even if it's 100. It's brutal, but I do it. Show must go on.
Sure.
Type, so.
And are you connected with do you do anything with Synestia at all?
No,
Or
that's
is
a
it
whole
separate?
different thing from me.
Yeah. Do you attend those at all? Or?
To be honest, I don't. When they they started a year before I did, and there would just be a few hundred people, and it was really mellow.
Yeah.
But then when the world found out about it, it's just too crowded for me. But I get why people enjoy it. And
Sure.
Hey, I hope they go and have fun. And
it's a very Hollywood thing. Like, we're going to the movies in the cemetery. It's kind of.
Well, you know what's interesting though is I think other cemeteries are starting to do those too, and I think maybe it's kind of opened people's mind a little bit, maybe, to spending time in a cemetery and kind of seeing it as a little more maybe comfortable than they had before.
Yeah, and also I don't have any problem with there being something of like I like the Dia de los Muertos celebration there, but to bring some life into the cemetery. To me, it's again, you and I both, and we grew up near the cemetery. It's like I don't have any heavy association with it at all. It's where I learned how to ride a bike.
Well, to me also, I've become friends with some families that have loved ones there, and they've told me, you know what, this place is about life.
Yeah,
there's movies, there's concerts, there's tours, there's
as
ducks.
As it should be.
There's ducks, turtles, geese, peacocks, a cat colony. Close Up is my co-host on the tour. The place is pulsating with life. And I think that is something, and it's so creative because a lot of cemeteries, they'll make you have like a flat marker on the ground and they're very strict.
Yeah.
We have so many whimsical graves. We have a rocket ship grave, a vinyl record grave. We just this week got the installation of a couch with dash hounds on it.
Oh, really?
In the cemetery. So it's a very creative place, and I think that is a major draw for many people, including me.
It's fascinating. So if people want to go, cemeterytours.com.
Tour.com. Cemetery Tour, singular.
Cemeterytour.com. Karie Bible.
Thank you.
Your real name.
My real name, yeah.
They're true tales from Weirdsville. Tales from Weirdsville. And they're true.
Can your heart stand the shocking facts?
Riot on Sunset Strip. The happening that blazed headlines across the nation.
This is the city. Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles, as well as the entirety of the California territory, was under Mexican rule until the end of the Mexican-American War. It was a series of battles with the Californios, the Hispanic peoples indigenous to the state, that ended in 1847 with the signing of the Treaty of Cahuenga. In 1876, the Southern Pacific Line connected New Orleans to Los Angeles, completing the Transcontinental Railroad. In 1892, oil was discovered in the area. In the 1920s, Los Angeles became home to the still in its infancy American movie industry, but the big money was still in oil. By then, California was the country's largest oil producer, accounting for 1/4 of the world's oil. Now, this was the 1920s. Prohibition was in full effect and gambling was illegal. If you wanted to gamble or get a drink, you had to go to the other side of the tracks, the shady part of town, the unincorporated part of Los Angeles County, an area known as West Hollywood. Running through West Hollywood was Sunset Boulevard, and a specific stretch of Sunset Boulevard, starting at Fairfax Avenue, heading west to Doheny, was lined with nightclubs and restaurants, many of them serving illegal liquor and gambling. This strip of Sunset became known as the Sunset Strip. See how easy that was? The fall of Prohibition coincided with the heyday of early Hollywood. And during that time in the 1930s and 40s, stars of the day flocked to the Sunset Strip to frequent clubs like Sherry's, Ciro's, the Macambo, the Trocadero. At the southwest corner of Sunset Boulevard and Laurel Canyon, where Crescent Heights becomes Laurel Canyon, you could find the Garden of Allah Apartments, a small cluster of bungalows centered around a swimming pool with a massive fountain in the middle of it. The Garden of Allah Apartments was home to, among others, Robert Benchley, Dorothy Parker, F. Scott Fitzgerald. By the 1950s, a new generation of Hollywood star had taken over. The Sunset Strip hung on, but it was more a tourist attraction than anything frequented by Hollywood's A-list. But at the very top of the strip, across Crescent Heights from the Garden of Allah, sat Schwab's drugstore, where, famously, one day sitting at the soda fountain, Lana Turner was discovered by director Mervyn LeRoy. Next to Schwab's was Googie's, the famous late-night coffee shop whose striking architectural style became known as, well, Googie's architecture. In the mid-1950s, Googie's became home to LA's beatnik scene, and so began the slow migration of Los Angeles' counterculture down the Sunset Strip. By the mid-1960s, clubs like Ciro's and the Macambo and the Trocadero had given way to clubs like Pandora's Box, the London Fog, the Sea Witch, the Whiskey A Go-Go. You see, some of these clubs, not the whiskey, but take Pandora's Box. Pandora's Box was a teen club. It didn't serve alcohol, but you could go, listen to a band, have a coffee or a soda, and dance, if you were under 18. You see, the baby boom generation at this point were in their late teens and early 20s. It seemed like everybody was in their late teens and early 20s, and they wanted a place to go and hang out and have a good time. And that place was the Sunset Strip.
And here's the world-famous Whiskey A Go-Go on the Strip, a favorite dancing spot for both the mods and movie stars who want to get it on.
But this explosion in youth culture confused and frightened a lot of older people. Watch any episode of Dragnet. But still, it's important to remember that this is 1966. Youth culture is pretty innocent. The Beatles had just released Revolver. Adam West's Batman was the hottest show on television. What we think of as the dirty, crazy, dangerous Charlie Manson hippie freak, well, that stage of the counterculture was still 2 and 3 years away, attributed largely to pot disappearing as the most common street drug and being replaced with LSD and other more dangerous drugs. But still, the California gubernatorial election, held in November of 1966, saw the election of a hard-right, reactive, conservative Republican, a former actor, of all things, named Ronald Reagan. The stage was set for one of the first conflicts that would come to overwhelm American culture in the late 60s and early 70s. And ground zero was the Sunset Strip. It was a bomb waiting to go off. All it needed was someone to light the fuse. Enter Ernest E. Debs, a member of the LA Board of Supervisors. Ernest Debs and the other city fathers had their own plans for the Sunset Strip. According to Dominic Priori's excellent book, Riot on the Sunset Strip, where I got anything I'm telling you here that I didn't know already, and that wasn't too much. Dominic Priori's Riot on the Sunset Strip by Jawbone Press. That's the source material for this entire piece. Get the book, highly recommended. It is great. The City Fathers didn't want the Sunset Strip to be lined with clubs like the Whiskey or Pandora's Box. They wanted the Sunset Strip to be a financial district, and they had big plans to make that happen. The nightclubs and restaurants would go away and be replaced by high-rise office buildings. But there was a problem. All of the big money people who would work in these high-rise office buildings lived in West LA and Bel Air and Brentwood and the Pacific Palisades. they might not like the commute. No problem. Build another freeway. The Laurel Canyon Freeway would branch off the Santa Monica Freeway, cut straight through Beverly Hills, straight up to Sunset Boulevard. 14 big miles of steel and concrete, cutting across the heart of Beverly Hills. To get the project going, Ernest Debs even set the city to condemning and tearing down any house they could that they thought might be in the way. Now, this is, sadly, an old story. It has happened before. In L.A. There's the story of the Chavez Ravine, which was, in the 1930s and 40s, home to a huge Mexican-American population. One of the reasons they all lived in Chavez Ravine was because of housing discrimination. They had a hard time living anywhere else. After World War II, as Los Angeles began to expand and its population exploded, Chavez Ravine became a very dangerous mix. People with no political clout living on prime real estate. And so, the city of Los Angeles bought the land that comprised Chavez Ravine on the promise that they would demolish the existing homes, the people who lived there would be temporarily relocated, while the city built what was to be known as the Elysian Park Heights Public Housing Project, which would include 24 13-story buildings and more than 160 two-story townhouses, in addition to newly rebuilt playgrounds and schools. It's a worker's paradise, baby. All the people who were moved out would then be relocated back into Chavez Ravine, into the Elysian Park Heights Public Housing Project, into new, glossy, Neutra-designed homes. And so, all the houses were bulldozed. But before work on the Elysian Park Heights Public Housing Program could begin, what do you know? A new mayor was elected, Norris Polson, and he thought public housing was un-American. My guess is he never had to live in it. So support for the Elysian Park project evaporated, and instead somebody said, I got it. Let's build a baseball stadium. And so Dodger Stadium was built on the site instead. And all the people who were evicted from their homes to make way for the Elysian Park Heights Public Housing Project, well, now they could go to a ball game. Just as good. But here's an important difference. The inhabitants of Chavez Ravine were low-income, largely Spanish-speaking, working-class families with absolutely zero political clout. They had no purchase. They had no voice. And as a result, they got screwed. What Ernest Debs and the LA Board of Supervisors did not understand was that to build a freeway through the heart of Beverly Hills, they had to displace and disrupt the people of Beverly Hills. And those people have money and power and resources. And they told Ernest Debs to go fuck himself. And they had the legal clout to make him do it. And they did. But Ernest Debs was not about to give up that easily. He was convinced that he could convince the powers that be in Beverly Hills that his idea was workable. It's good for business. We're going to tear down a bunch of homes and build a beautiful concrete freeway and tear down a bunch of seedy nightclubs and build beautiful concrete high-rise bank buildings. Everybody loves freeways and bank buildings. The city of Beverly Hills said that they didn't want a freeway running through the middle of town. Go stuff it, thanks so much. Besides, they added, and they really should have just quit while they were ahead, but they went ahead and made the point that the Sunset Strip was too congested for a financial center. It can't handle the human or automobile traffic that row upon row of high-rise office buildings will bring. I mean, look how crowded it is now with all of these 1- and 2-story nightclubs. And indeed, the Sunset Strip was crowded with kids going to shows and hanging out and having fun and seeing bands and dancing and not causing trouble of any kind. But solutions to non-existent problems are the bread and butter of politics. Turn on the news today. Ernie Debs had a plan. If the city of Beverly Hills thought the Sunset Strip was too crowded, he'd clean it up. And then he'd get his freeway and his office towers. Debs contacted LA County Sheriff Peter Pitches, and the following is quoted directly from Riot on the Sunset Strip. Quote, "Working closely with the county sheriff, Peter J. Pitches, Debs suddenly, and without warning, began enforcing archaic, discriminatory statutes on patrons at teenage nightclubs. Ignoring the fact that these kids weren't looking for trouble, they were simply going out to see bands and hang out with their friends." End quote. The LAPD and the county sheriff began enforcing a 10 p.m. curfew for kids under 18. 10 o'clock! Another quote from the book by Johnny Legend. "I could go around and do all sorts of horrible things and never have any trouble with the police. But I got rousted for absolutely no reason at least 10 or 12 times during that period. I would be with my mom driving along in a Dodge Dart, and they would pull us over and harass us for an hour. The cop would be screaming at my mother, 'Male or female passenger,' due to my long hair." End quote. Yeah, by all accounts, the cops were having a blast, and that should surprise no one. They were smarting over last year's criticism of not responding properly to the Watts riots. Many felt intentionally so. So they certainly didn't spare the firepower when it came to protecting the public from 17-year-olds walking down the street at 10:15. And this pleased people like Ernest Deb and the older generation of business owners along the Sunset Strip. It did not please the owners of the teenage clubs, nor the teenage patrons, nor the teenage patrons' parents, who had to drive nightly to the West Hollywood Sheriff's Station or downtown to the LAPD to get their kids. They were not too pleased with the new law. Letters to the editor in the LA Times and letters sent directly to Mayor Sam Yorty all made the same point. What else were the kids supposed to do? There was very little public activity provided to kids between 15 and 18. The entire city of Beverly Hills didn't even have one bowling alley, for Christ's sakes. The parents' position was quite simple. The kids are here. They're not going anywhere. Give them something to do. One youth protester told the LA Herald, "We don't want to take over the Strip. We just want someplace to meet and talk." For the record, the LA Herald had been reporting stories of the clashes between cops and kids with sober, reasoned headlines like "Teenage Rampage" and "Long Hair Nightmare." And let's remember, this battle between the kids and the cops was on the surface. What was really going on was a fight between two groups of businessmen. The traditional nightclubs of the Sunset Strip, the holdovers from the 40s and 50s, were no longer making money. The newer clubs, the rock clubs, the teen clubs, were making money. And the old school businesses were suffering even more so, not only because they were relics of a bygone age, but because of the traffic and the congestion of the kids hanging out on the Strip. All these old school restaurant dudes, with the help of people like Ernest Debs, had the police on their side. And so, the police began intentionally misinterpreting an old, on-the-books but seldom used curfew law, designed to prevent loitering, and they used it to bust anybody under 18 who was out on the Sunset Strip after 10 p.m. That set the stage for the conflict and the flashpoint of what would become known as the LA curfew riots was Pandora's box. A local LA rock radio station broadcast that there would be a peaceful protest in front of Pandora's Box to demonstrate youthful opposition to the overzealous enforcement of LA's 10 p.m. curfew law. Celebrities like Peter Fonda and Sonny and Cher showed up, as well as a lot of kids. Some say 1,000 kids, some say 3,000 kids, sitting in the traffic island outside of Pandora's Box, strumming guitars and singing. Then the sheriff's department and the LAPD showed up at 10 o'clock on the dot and began to, quote, aggressively clear the area, moving in columns of 4 down the sidewalk, shoving kids and prodding them with nightsticks. They moved forcibly on Pandora's Box, rousting the kids hanging around outside. According to the Los Angeles Herald, several teenagers were injured and taken to nearby hospitals. Youths quickly abandoned any thought of peaceful protest and moved into the street. A couple kids climbed on top of a city bus. The bus got stuck in traffic. The kids began rocking the bus. 6 people were let off the bus. The police tried to clear the area, but as soon as they cleared one block, the kids would just reassemble on a different block. The LAPD's attitude was best exemplified by, and you can't make this name up, Captain Crumley. The situation is aggravated by the presence of more than 1,000 youthful bums. These weren't frustrated teenagers. These were left-wing groups and outside agitators. And they'd made the Sunset Strip an attraction for teenagers and beatniks. And Captain Crumley was going to shut it all down. Here is Neil Young talking about his experience with the LAPD around that time.
I got busted by the cops. Remember when they took me down to the Sunset and Clark, down there where the police station was. Took me inside, and then started me and this other guy, Freddie Brechtel. I don't know if you remember him.
Oh, I remember that name.
Yeah.
My God.
So we were in the cell, and they were calling us names and everything, and the cop was calling us. The one cop had real short hair, like sticking up, like in a brush cut with big horn rim glasses. And he called me an animal, So I called him a grasshopper.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Oh, God. And they came in and knocked my tooth out, this one right here, and did this other stuff and banged us around. It happened really fast. I didn't put up much of a fight, obviously. And
the demonstrations continued for another 4 nights. On November 13th, 300 teenage demonstrators were met by 200 LAPD officers. The teenagers were, by all accounts, demonstrating peacefully, but the cops weighed in, billy clubs drawn.
There's been a lot of talk about the riots that have been going on Sunset Strip.
There haven't really been riots. They've been, in actuality, since I was there, they've been demonstrations. And, but I guess a lot of people and journalists don't know how to spell demonstration, so they use the word riot because it only has 4 letters.
On November 21st, the LA Board of Supervisors passed an emergency order which banned dancing in teen clubs. This was 1966, a city ordinance that banned dancing unless accompanied by a parent, guardian, or spouse over the age of 21. Want to dance? Sure. Great, I'll go get my mom. Now, having previously tangled with Ernest Debs before, and won, some clubs like the Whiskey A Go-Go, the Galaxy, Gazzari's, and the Sea Witch were exempt from this rule. But soon the Trip, the London Fog, the Action, and Pandora's Box would all close down. Ernest Debs never did get his freeway through Beverly Hills, and the Sunset Strip never did become a financial district. It did cease to become the center of the West Coast music scene for a while. The following year, 1967, the Summer of Love, would focus the world's attention on San Francisco's music scene. It would move back down to LA with the punk revolution in the late 70s, and then dig in its high heels with the hair metal craze of the mid-80s. Here are 2 fun facts. Stephen Stills wandered down to the Sunset Strip riots quite by accident, took a look around, and wrote a song about it in about 15 minutes.
There's something happening here. Exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. Think it's time to stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
And one final fun fact. We spoke a lot about Pandora's Box, which was located in the traffic island at Sunset and Crescent Heights. It's hard to envision it now because the land behind Pandora's Box, which used to be the Garden of Allah, was bulldozed to make room for what is now, in my opinion, the world's ugliest strip mall. As they were demolishing the Garden of Allah, a young Joni Mitchell was watching from her room in the Chateau Marmont. And as she watched Progress's ugly march, she wrote a song about that too.
Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot.
Again, my deep thanks to Dominic Priori and his excellent book, Riot on the Sunset Strip. Go buy it.
Folks, it's really delicious, and we know you'll enjoy it too. At our refreshment stand, you'll find these pizza pies, freshly baked to your order. Make sure you get yours and enjoy it now.
You know what was awful? World War II. No, seriously. And after World War II, the globe was deeply traumatized as the nations of the world put themselves back into some form of civilized order. In America, which, by and large, emerged comparatively unscathed, losing 500,000 people, compared to, say, Russia, who lost 24 million people. But America is where we live, so let's talk about what America did. Deeply traumatized by the effects of the war, American culture slipped into more than a decade of quiet conformity. Or so it hoped.
Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days.
Yes, it was the America of happy days. Clean-cut, fresh-faced kids in bobby socks and varsity jackets, and everywhere you looked, everybody was happy and well-fed and smiling, as long as they were white. Although women became a large part of the American workforce during the war, once the soldiers returned home, women were unceremoniously ushered back into the kitchen or the bedroom, where they began dutifully giving birth to the baby boom. America in the 1950s was about, if nothing else, cultural conformity, with television acting as a visual guidebook. But as they say, to every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And in the 1950s, there were many disparate streams of rebellion to counter the tidal wave of white middle-class conformity. The biggest and most important movement was the burgeoning civil rights movement. Black music seeped into white culture through rock and roll, at least once a white guy started singing it. And in the world of literature and pop culture, there were the beatniks.
This is only for the cool cats. The sterile creeps can crawl out now. Upon a certain birthday, dear parents, we do not thank you, dear fumbling mother and father, both, upon this miserable occasion. We give you offerings of respectful loathing.
The Beat movement, also called the Beat Generation, was an American social and literary movement originating in the 1950s. It was centered in the bohemian artist communities of North Beach in San Francisco, Venice in Los Angeles, and Greenwich Village in New York. Beatniks was a derisive nickname taken from beat, meaning weary, but later said to mean beatitude or beatific, as in beat and down with the world and spirituality. Although it was largely a literary movement, beatniks took their look, their manners, their style, and their hipster slang-fueled vocabulary from jazz and bebop. But to that end, beats loved word jazz, taking poetry and literature out of the hallowed halls of academia and bringing it back to the street. Allen Ginsberg's Howl being probably the most famous poem associated specifically with the beatnik era.
I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix.
But the Beatnik Bible was On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Born to French-Canadian parents in Lowell, Massachusetts, Kerouac was a novelist and a poet whose rambling style of prose aped the free-form notes of jazz, as if to read his writing was, dare I say it, an act of jazz.
There was a little alley in San Francisco, back of the Southern Pacific Station at 3rd and Townsend, in red brick of drowsy, lazy afternoons with everybody at work in offices. In the air you feel the impending rush of their commuter frenzy. As soon they'll be charging en masse from Market and Sansom buildings on foot and in buses and all well-dressed through working man Frisco of walk-up truck drivers.
Working man Frisco of walk-up. That was Jack Kerouac and Tonight Show host Steve Allen on the piano. Ginsberg's Howl, Kerouac's On the Road, William Burroughs' Naked Lunch. Beatniks rejected the conformist, consumerist society of America in the 1950s and embraced personal release, purification, and illumination through the heightened sensory awareness that might be induced by drugs, jazz, sex, and, of course, Zen Buddhism. They wore French shirts and berets, smoked too much, drank espresso, and read their poems in places like the Café Wa in Greenwich Village and Lawrence Ferlinghetti's City Lights bookstore in San Francisco. Both venues still around, by the way. As the 1950s became the 1960s, beatniks entered popular culture. The popular sitcom Dobie Gillis had a regular character who was a beatnik, bongo-playing Maynard G. Krebs, portrayed by pre-Gilligan Bob Denver. From there, they became sort of a cartoon stereotype, showing up in everything from Frankie Avalon and the Nat Funicello Beach Party movies to, well, the Munsters.
Dictionary? Down the ferry. Mary, Mary, quite contrary.
As the 1960s became the late 1960s, the beatnik movement got absorbed by the much more wild and crazy hippie movement, which was much more concerned with stopping the war in Vietnam than it was with the academic co-option of poetry. Jack Kerouac died in 1969 from issues related to cirrhosis of the liver. You can guess how he got that. But the beatniks were an indelible part of the birth of 20th century American counterculture. I always thought I'd be much more prone to being a beatnik than I would to being a hippie. To begin with, beatniks had cooler clothes, and for my dollar, hotter chicks.
My old man was a bread stasher all his life. He never got fat. He wound up with a used car, a 17-inch screen, and arthritis. Tamara is a drag, man. Tamara is a king-sized bust. They cry, put down pot, don't think a lot. For what? Time, how much, and what to do with it. Sleep, man, and you might wake up digging the whole human race, giving itself 3 days to get out. Tamara is a drag, Pops. The future is a flake. I had a canary who couldn't sing. I had a cat that let me share my pad with her. I bought a dog that killed the cat that ate the canary. What is truth? had an uncle with an Ivy League heart. He had life with a belt in the back. He had a button-down brain, wind up, a belt in the mouth, and a button-down lip. We coughed blood on this earth. Now there's a race for space. We can cough blood on the moon soon. Tomorrow is Dragsville Cats. Tomorrow is a king-size drag. Tula fast shorts, swing with a gassy chick. Turn on to 1,000 joys. Smile on what happened or check what's going to happen. You'll miss what's happening. Turn your eyes inside and dig the vacuum. Tamara drag.
My guest today, one of my favorite people, no lie. She is, and this will explain it. This will explain it in 4 simple words. She is a vintage LA documentarian. I took L and A as 2 words on that. You're one of an LA historian. You're vintage Los Angeles on Instagram, I believe.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you are, and you're also on Spectrum News doing little history bites.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Pretty much every day.
Yeah, pretty much every day. There's a lot to cover in LA, historically.
Yes. And this is, I should say your name, Allison Martino, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for having me. I have a name other than Vintage Los Angeles.
Please welcome Vintage Los Angeles. She reports on Allison Martino every night on Spectrum News. This was the first question that I wanted to ask you. And this isn't a vintage LA question. This is a contemporary LA question. I have lived in Los Angeles. You grew up in Los Angeles.
Correct.
I have lived here since 1989. In the past 2 years, I have seen the city descend into an urban hellscape.
Mm-hmm.
Am I the only one that thinks that?
No, you are absolutely correct.
It seems that they have put everything into that real estate and contracting and construction is the ultimate goal of anything.
Yes.
At the expense of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, completely out of balance. And also displacing thousands of people with buildings are sitting empty because the rents are prohibitive, but the property owner would rather have the buildings empty to take the tax write-off. Or I don't know what they're doing, or if people from China are just buying up empty apartment buildings and parking their money there. Yeah. It's I feel, and I want to talk about the fun stuff too, but this was the thing that's right on the tip of my nose. It's completely out of whack.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what to do, or I don't even know where to start to try and voice an opinion as to, can we fix this before it's too late?
We're trying. I mean, the LA Conservancy is really great. They really do go after a lot of buildings. The problem is, like, a perfect example is Sunset Strip. You know, we've seen, as long as I've been alive, which is 50 years, I've pretty much
29
years, honey. I don't mind. I've been around. I made it. I'm okay. I like this age. Anyway, I always recognized where I was, no matter what decade I was in.
Sure.
Or what era I was playing around in. And today I will go up to La Brea and Highland and Sunset, and I actually don't know where I am. If I haven't driven down there in a year or even 6 months, I go, wait, what happened to that? And unfortunately, little apartment buildings that have been around forever are being demolished for these huge monstrosities with, starting at $2 million condos.
Right.
And that saddens me that we're losing so much character. I mean, that's number one. The character of the city is being wiped out completely in any area, whether it's Venice or Silver Lake's pretty good at this point. I'm worried about it. But West Hollywood and downtown's getting better, but the central part of LA has lost a lot of character.
Yeah, and
Santa
Sunset-
Monica Boulevard. I mean, Santa Monica Boulevard is unrecognizable to me.
It is unrecognizable. And the Sunset Strip, when they are finished with what they're doing, is going to look like the Vegas Strip.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing.
I call it, it's going to be Hotel Row. You know,
it's going to be Hotel Row.
Right.
These hotels are the size of aircraft carriers stood on end.
Right. Well,
who's going to stay in the hotels? There's nothing here but hotels.
And there's nowhere to go. And it sort of feels like, you know, in those hotels in Vegas, casinos, they have casinos inside those places. They have showrooms. These hotels do not have entertainment. They have, you know, super high-end restaurants that you're only going to go to maybe once if you're on vacation and just try it. But it's not going to be your hangout. And there's nowhere to walk to. I mean, we don't have Tower Records anymore. I worried about Book Soup.
Book Soup is clinging on by its
clinging on. That whole block between, like, you know, the Strip from Doheny to Crescent Heights has changed so much.
Which people know. People listen to the podcast that aren't from LA.
And like
that is the Sunset Strip.
The Sunset Strip, and like Tower Records sort of, you know, like was in the center, and it was like this music sort of mecca corner that everybody went to, where Book Soup's across the street and Tower Records is there. But now, you know, the Viper Room, I mean, we have a couple clubs left. We have the Whiskey Go-Go, thankfully has been landmarked, so it cannot be torn down.
Right.
The Rainbow Bar and Grill, which is our rock and roll, the only real rock and roll, you know, I'd say restaurant hang, the bar, you know, bar food and that kind of thing around. And then across the street, for some reason, the south side of Sunset is easier to demolish than the north side. I just learned this. And so you're not going to recognize anything on the south side of Sunset. It's hotel. None of them match. None of them look right together. They're too big for the Strip. The one that really gets me depressed is where the House of Blues was.
Yeah.
I mean, that was such a cool building. It was unique. It was different, whether you liked it or not. It stood back from the street, so you kind of went down into it.
Yeah, it had a character. It had architectural.
It did. It had character, and come on. I mean, there were great bands that played there. And anyway, now it's this big thing called the Pandry that's going up, and I think the condos are starting at $2.5 million, and it comes right up to the Strip.
Street,
When you're driving by it, I almost feel like it's going to like fall on me. It's so claustrophobic.
Yeah, you know, there's been no planning for. Have you read? All right, she furiously stormed away.
Turn my radio down. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Have you read The Big Goodbye?
I have, and it's excellent.
Okay.
I mean, you know.
Yeah, in The Big Goodbye, which is the story of the making. Ostensibly, it's the story of the making of Chinatown, but it's also a really fascinating and you can't put it down history of LA from 68 to 75.
Yeah, that writer is brilliant.
Sam
Wasson. Yeah.
And,
I mean,
but he talks about just when they start to tear down the property around where Robert Town lived up near Topanga. He talks about going to a whatever it was, a zoning board mission or a place where people go to get their permits to build. And they said, well, this thing is never going to get built, so I'm going to approve it.
Right.
And you get the feeling that they'll just approve anything because there's no studies. To me, I don't know what's going to happen traffic-wise on Sunset Boulevard.
God. Sunset Boulevard was supposed to be a landscape that you looked out over the city. It's up on a hill, you know. I mean, you don't realize that when you're driving down, you're far up. You're right below the hills, like right there. And back in the day, when you study photos from the 20s and the 30s, the buildings were not very high. So you could see over, but you could see past the Strip and all of downtown. And they've covered it all up with all these big monstrosities. And I've noticed why they're doing it with no characters, because then they put these massive digital screens up, advertising the next show and the next TV show. And then I'm going, wow, you know, they built one over here just behind me where Dino's Lodge used to be, where Dean Martin had a restaurant. And it was so charming. Lodge. It was a lodge. Dino's Lodge. We don't have lodges anymore. You know, we don't have chalets. You know, now they're like,
no, everything looks like
communist housing.
Yeah, or if an Apple store was a city.
Yeah.
There's no sense of geography. There's no sense of location. There's no way to know where you are. And
it's disorientating.
Yeah, and I understand I understand that cities evolve and that architecture evolves and that people, that cities grow and evolve. But Los Angeles isn't growing normally. It's like Los Angeles has acromegaly. Like everything is, way too out. And the fact is, the streets are lined with tents.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that gets solved. These people aren't waiting for a hotel room or a $2 million condo.
Right. That's why I said there's no balance.
Yeah. And
there's
that wasn't a problem.
Right. No.
10 years ago.
No.
It's not their fault. Something has changed for the worse. And unfortunately, the moneyed interests have no motivation to address that issue until it starts to affect tourism and people renting hotels, and then they'll try to do something. But
no, it's really, really bad. I don't see how it gets better. I think that's why people are relocating to Palm Springs. LA is my city. I mean, I probably will never leave here, but LA is leaving. LA feels like it's leaving me a bit.
I feel the same way. And I have had very good friends also through the pandemic a friend of mine moved to Chicago, a friend of mine moved back to New England. Yeah. Because with Zoom and everything, you can kind of work from wherever you want to work.
Sure.
Now. I actually love living in Los Angeles. I love LA, as the song says. And, but there are certain places I don't even bother going anymore. I love Book Soup. Yeah. I love going to Book Soup. I often don't know what I want to read. So I like to walk around a bookstore and see things.
Right.
But it's not worth the drag now to go to Sunset Strip.
I don't understand. I mean, first of all, you can't park up there. So there's no way of just pulling over and go over to Book Soup. Sunset Strip was clubs, restaurants, boutique-y type hotels, sushi restaurants, tattoo parlors. Yeah. It's all gone.
Dukes.
Dukes, coffee shop, everything from Hamburger Hamlet,
Do any of the people that are making these decisions, are none of them from Los Angeles?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I'll give you an example. For example, a few years ago, they were building where the old Scandia restaurant was at Doheny and Sunset, this fabulous old mid-century building that was this fantastic restaurant through the day, and everyone had their Sweet 16s there, or you'd see Frank Sinatra dining there. It was one of those like sort of old Hollywood throwbacks, like a Chasen's, fancy but fun. And anyway, that building had been sitting empty for many years. It tried to be many, many things. So it's a new Marriott wants to take that lot, right? So they start to demolish the place little by little. And I thought, wait a minute. Frank Sinatra had an office up there and his own shower and room in his office. And I thought, I'm going to alert the Marriott Hotel, whoever's in charge there, to let them know if people are coming to Hollywood, right, they could rent the Sinatra room.
Right.
And you could incorporate that, whatever you can fix and save, incorporate that into some kind of Sinatra suite and bank on that. Oh, they didn't care. Oh no, take it down. We can't incorporate that. In fact, I think one person said, "Who?"
Yeah. It's really like it looks like it's modeled on Atlantic City.
Oh God, yes. Even Atlantic City has a little appreciation for the past entertainers that have performed there. I mean, they have museums and stuff, My dad's in a couple of them. And, even though that's not the real place to go anymore.
Atlantic City.
Trump thinks. But it just still has, Vegas kind of turned its back on that too. But there is museums in Vegas.
And awareness of the history. And, that's the whole, the whole story of every sort of noir that is set in LA. The whole point of, LA is that you can come here and reinvent yourself. The city has no memory. The city has no history, but that is the city's history. That
We're
identity,
it out. Yes,
identity is a crucial part of the city's history.
Exactly.
And that would be what would attract people to come here. That's what I don't understand is I don't know who they think is going to come and stay in those hotels, because it's not Vegas. There aren't shows.
But it's like you're saying, you know, when the developers do not know the history of this town and don't really have the reach to know what came before. People like me, I mean, that's what Vintage LA was created for. I created it in the beginning to just have a forum to talk about our hometown, that everything's getting wiped out. Now, this is 11 years ago. Right. I never remember seeing it like this. Now the page has turned into save this, we got to save that. And it's turning into these super aware, like, let's save the last diner. I mean, let's save Norm's coffee shop.
Where are these people that you expect to come here?
And, you know, that's where you see a lot of, I think, the real characters of LA. You know, those offbeat people, I see them in coffee shops, you know. I mean, Rip Taylor used to be, you know, at the, coffee shop every day.
Yeah.
The Silver Spoon that was up on the street, you know, they tore that down. And like, I remember being at the Hamburger Hamlet on the night they closed, which was 2012, or no, the end of 2011. And Nancy Sinatra was there, who was there every Sunday night if she was in town with Rip Taylor. And, you know, I mean, every night.
Nancy and Rip Taylor, were they an item?
Well, you know, I have to ask Nancy. They were like very, you know, you see just these regulars, I call them, you know, the regulars. And I never really thought, it's funny, I grew up here and I never looked at them as celebrities. Right. I looked at them as like,
well, your dad was, we should say for people who don't know, your father was Al Martino, who was a very, very popular singer, who's in The Godfather. So you grew up in that world. You were friends
I grew up in like the tail end of the older Hollywood, you know, where the show business and the.
But your father's friends were famous. You saw famous people all the time.
I did. Yeah. And it's funny because you would appreciate this. My dad hung out with more comics than singers.
Yeah, that's what you said. That he was like friends with Buddy Hackett and all those people.
Yeah, because they were, you know, when you would go to Vegas or Atlantic City, like Tahoe back in the 70s, the 60s, a comic always opened. So the singers became very friendly with the comics, because they would tour together.
Sure, right.
And so Dad wasn't really that friendly with a lot of other singers. So we had a lot of funny people in our house.
Yeah.
You know,
I think we talked about this the last time you were on the podcast, but it's worth noting again. The George Carlin album, FM and AM, starts with a story of him getting fired from the Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas for saying shit.
Right.
He was opening for your father.
Yeah.
You have the playbill for that show.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And I think I told you I got to see George many, many, many years later. And I introduced myself backstage at one of his shows in Vegas. Oh my God, I still feel so bad about that. And I go, listen, my dad did not get you fired. That was the entertainment director. My dad would have had you back 100 times. He had a good sense of humor.
Funny.
But, you know, yeah, he was, you know, the language back then was just shocking, you know, on a Lenny Bruce level, you know, and so, but you know, they had the 8 o'clock shows and the 11 o'clock shows. So you do 2 shows a night. And of course the 11 o'clock got a little more crazy.
But wasn't Buddy Hackett back then swearing?
Yeah.
Or Red Fox? Like,
oh yeah.
it wasn't that George Carlin said shit. It's that he was,
he took he took it probably to a sexual level or something. Yeah. Like
but it was also that he was not that he was more of a counterculture figure.
Definitely.
Than a traditional showbiz.
Definitely. And he wasn't that known then. So that's another thing, you know. I mean, maybe if you were a little bit more established, you might be like, oh my God, Buddy, you know, cool it down a little bit there. But to get fired, you know, and you're never coming to this hotel again, and you're a newbie, you know, George took the chances and he made it. So God love him.
Yeah. Someone said that the dirtiest comic they ever saw was Buddy Hackett.
He was pretty dirty. Yeah. I wasn't allowed to see his show when I was growing up.
Did you? That's hilarious.
I wasn't allowed. No.
But he was in your house a lot.
Yeah. He was in our house. I guess I didn't need to see that. I saw a different show.
Sure.
You know, the dinner table show when all the names get dropped and I get to hear all the, you know, the juicy gossip.
I'm sure. Do you still, so who, just so we get some local color and we'll revisit our kvetching. Who are the people that, were there people that you didn't know were famous that were just in your house all the time? And then suddenly you realize like, oh my God, that person's really famous.
That's a good question. No, I just grew up with them at such a young age that I just thought they were regular people. It was when I started visiting my friends at other houses and got to know their family, and I wondered why those kind of people weren't at their table. It's when I realized something's different here. You know, it was all show business all the time. You know, it was always discussing show business, testing out the latest joke. You know,
right? Sure.
Pranks and everything was about food and pranks and the road and managers and touring and backstage, and it was really exciting to listen to it all. And like I said, I think I told you I used to hide a tape recorder in the planter.
No, I didn't know that. You're like a little Nixon.
My dad got so mad at me because I thought they were so funny. And I didn't have any brothers and sisters, so I really loved when they came over because it was really just felt like there was a family around.
Yeah, there were people around.
They were people around, and Dad was really funny around them too because he was a funny guy. And my dad had tape recorders all over the house because he would rehearse and listen to himself playing back. So I took one of his recorders, took a tape, hit record, put it in the planter.
That's so funny.
And I did this for many, many dinners. And I remember one time, when the tape just ends and it goes like that.
Those old cassettes.
Yeah, makes a huge noise, know, and you'd have to like take black tape and put it over the red button so people didn't see the recording. And I remember it snapped and my dad looked at me and goes, "What are you doing?" Because let's face it, sometimes the boys came over, those kind of guys.
Yeah.
They owned all the casinos and the nightclubs and stuff. So God forbid they saw me taping their
Yeah, exactly. They go to Al's house. He's wearing a wire.
His little girl's a narc, but it's just funny. I have a lot of them. I need to get them digitized. Some of them.
You have these?
Yeah, I've got boxes of them, and they sound so good. I mean, those Maxell tapes, they did hold up.
Yeah, they hung on there.
So I have a lot of those. But
who are some of the people on those tapes? Who are some of the people that you'd hear on those tapes?
I think Dean Martin is on one, and Buddy Hackett for sure, Maury Amsterdam, Joey Bishop, guys like that. They were regulars. They came over quite a bit. And so when my father died, my interaction with a lot of them kind of, wasn't as much as it was.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
And we're losing so many of them.
Yeah.
Now they're, wow.
Your mom's still with
My
us.
mom is still very much alive. She's amazing. Mm-hmm. She's almost 17 years younger than my father. So
right.
She's incredible. But Peter Marshall, we still are very close to, and we love him dearly. He's such a great. You should have him on sometime. Anyway,
that would be amazing.
Yeah, he's amazing. But like getting back to the restaurants, like if Dad wasn't cooking or we didn't have them over, you would see them at the Hamburger Hamlet. Right. Restaurants like that, like on a Sunday night, you would just walk in, and like I said, there'd be Dean Martin or Nancy. And I remember on the very last day, when the Hamlet was changed, it was closing. It was so sad. I mean, it was just epically, I'm still not over it. And I remember Nancy said something that kind of stuck with me. And she goes, "Well, where do we go now?" And I thought about that. And like, where do you go now? I mean, we're not going to go to the newest thing, with the red carpet and the velvet ropes and like bottle service and all that. You just want something comfortable, where the waiters know you and you have rapport with them for 30 years. We knew all the waiters' names. They come over for dinner sometimes. Those are getting harder to find, but again, there's Dantana's and there's Moose on Frank, and they're very, very expensive.
And people here's what I don't understand. You're looking at life after COVID, but it is going to end and the world will reopen and people will want to go out.
Yeah.
I don't know. A lot of Los Angeles people don't want to go out because it's just it's too creepy.
Mm-hmm. That's the word.
To walk through a tent city.
Yeah.
On every major thoroughfare.
Everywhere. Yes.
Downtown is out of the question.
Out of the question.
And just think about that. We drove through downtown a couple days ago just to see what's going on.
Wow.
And
it's block after block after block of tents.
And I don't know the origin of that. I don't know the legality of it. And I don't know the solution to it.
Well, I think you said at the beginning of this conversation is that, did we see this 10 years ago? No. I mean, it was there, but to this level, right?
I did not see
2 years ago.
tents.
Right.
I did not see sidewalks full of tents.
Right.
2 years ago.
And it started when these monstrosities have started going up, and the rents are going up, and the condos are too expensive, and the housing is too expensive, and apartments are out of control.
And they're not full. That's what I don't understand.
I know,
I was talking, this 2 years ago. I was at my daughter's tennis game talking to one of the parents, and they were talking about how like they just built an apartment building and they were getting like, I got like $5,000 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, that's not good. Can't even rent it.
I know. You can't even rent it.
Some guy who lives in, Dubai buys it so he can park some money and it just sits empty.
That's the problem.
And there's no tax penalty for that. I mean, there's a lot of, and look, these like any, it won't change until they've taken the gun out of your face and shoved it up your ass. Then you go, all right, what's the problem here?
Right.
But I don't see how it will change until then. And you work for a news organization. Mm-hmm. Is this a topic that people talk about in the corridors of power?
It's more of a topic on social media, because it's a conversation that I can have with a community of people. Like if I'll put something on Vintage LA, which is, like reaching, say, 1 million people.
Right.
And you show a photograph of this rendering that's going to go up in a corner that natives or people who've been here forever know that corner, go, what? They're putting that there? And that's where I find social media to be very helpful. Because the comments, you're seeing all these comments that come in, and they come in by hundreds. And so we're not alone in the way we think. Spectrum's different because I report about, I've been reporting this past year about COVID and how that's affected tourism and anything from museums to restaurants to the outdoor dining situation. It's been such a strange time for me as a reporter in this situation to I never couldn't have imagined I'd be reporting about that, and going into the kitchens and showing the public that this restaurant is taking safety precautions. And, it's not just about masks. There has to be to sanitize, it to have 6 feet apart in the kitchen. A lot of people don't know what's going on in the kitchens, and so we wanted to explore certain places that have really gone far and beyond to keep their business.
Right.
And to hold on. And I want to support those businesses. So I'm very lucky to have a platform on Spectrum to support local businesses. Then on Vintage LA, we're able to talk about development, overdevelopment, and no balance. And, places like the Formosa, which is one of the greatest, it used to be like a dive, but now it's this beautiful restored restaurant that's landmarked, thank God, over
right. And it came this close to being part of a parking garage.
It almost became a parking garage. The LA Conservancy stepped in and saved it many years ago.
To the point that, and I was a member of the Conservancy then. I think I still am.
Yeah.
I got mail. That's all I know.
Well, for people that are listening, in LA Confidential, that's the scene where Lana Turner is sitting there. And that is not a movie set. That is a real restaurant that looks exactly like that. And I said to the Group 33 are friends of mine. They went in to purchase it and to glorify 33. It. Yeah, put it back to its original glory. And it was just amazing to see it. It never looked better. And I said, movie sets can't even recreate this. It's so authentic. No. But yet LA wants to wipe them all out.
Yeah. And literally, if you see the Formosa, which is at Santa Monica and La Brea, they literally, the parking garage is built around it. They literally built right up to and it is like somebody dropped this from space and it cleaved off the corner of the parking garage.
So funny.
It was such a spiteful move.
It was, because it's a Target and that whole complex.
Yeah, but those are rare too. I mean, occasionally the city gets a Target and it's a big deal and you get.
I know. And that's great, but they took the parking lot away for the Formosa. I think that was kind of sad. And they
wanted to turn the Formosa into their parking lot.
Oh, they wanted to extend it into God knows what. But because it's like, again, it's landmarked. So they really had no choice. They had to build around it, which is phenomenal.
But it was landmarked at the very last minute.
Very last. Yes, you're absolutely right. Like 2016 or something like that.
Same with May Company, if I'm not mistaken, because I remember they wanted to. The May Company is now going to be the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Museum, but that had when I first lived in LA, my girlfriend worked at the May Company.
Oh, yeah.
But that building had a target on it, no pun intended. That had a bullseye on it for a wrecking ball.
It did.
And it's a miracle that.
Yeah.
That
And so
it.
beautifully restored and preserved. And
it's a gorgeous building.
It's one of our most beautiful Art Deco,
and the Cinerama Dome.
Thank God for the
grudgingly, grudgingly kept the Cinerama Dome.
Yep. And, think about it. Those are the theaters that people want to go to.
Yeah.
People always say, let's go to the ArcLight and see a movie. I hope we can be in the Dome.
Right.
How many people say they want to be in the Dome?
Yeah, but some bean counter in St. Louis where with the hedge fund that is paying for just like, well, no, get rid of it.
I know. Well, thank God Quentin Tarantino saves things and saves little theaters like the New Beverly and programs them with great movies.
Are any of these things that we're talking about, are they open now?
I don't think so. I think we're in that first phase of restaurants having 25%.
Can you sit in a restaurant?
Yes. I will give you an example. I tested it 2 nights ago. I am a Dan Tana's regular, so I'm in there a lot. Sure. And I hadn't walked through that restaurant in a year. And I went in, they did the 25%. And, there's 2 rooms in Dan Tana's, a bar in between.
Right.
Only 2 tables in one room and 2 tables in the next room. Now they built a whole outdoor patio that's fabulous. And when I walked in, I felt, I like the word you used, creepy. It felt weird being inside.
I can only imagine.
Well,
yeah.
I didn't last very long. I ended up outside, but I didn't want to. I want to support the restaurants and everything, but I just said I'm not ready yet.
Yeah.
I'm not ready. And
you haven't had all your shots.
No, I haven't. And you're right.
You're right out of the pound. You haven't had all your shots yet.
I need you. It's so funny. Yes, I'm not ready yet with my shots, and I just didn't. The creep factor was there, and I just thought I'm going to go back outside because this is what we've been doing. We've been practicing social distancing outside with 6 feet apart, and sometimes there'll be a petition between, and I felt like I've gotten used to that.
Well, let me ask you a question. This happened in my house today.
Okay.
So my girlfriend and I, we will have had our second shots on April 1st. She says, what we should do right after you get our shots? We should go to Cabo and we can see the last bit of the whale migration. We can go in a raft and you can touch the whale calves, which is what she lives for.
Right.
Which is great. She loves whales. But my instinctual reaction was like, we can't go to Cabo.
You mean right after your shot?
Well, just like to me, it's like it's still in the pandemic. We can't get on a plane and fly internationally and check into a hotel and get in a car. Or am I being overly neurotic?
No, I don't think you're. I know I wouldn't. I have friends that have already booked trips to Italy and in April and September. And to me, I'm terrified of that. I would rather
September. I could even see like
maybe
you've had both of your shots in the world, and you give it.
We have to see where we end up. Like what's going to happen.
Starting, and I was like, I don't. Isn't there a place we can drive and see whales?
Well, it will be amazing when we can, and we will all be. But I'm not definitely not ready. If my friends drive cross country if they have to get somewhere, they don't want to get on planes. I don't want to, but we're getting there. We're getting there. You know,
I felt bad that I was like, that's nuts, but. And then she knows people. No, they travel. They've been traveling all year. Like, well, they're lucky they can afford it, and they're lucky they haven't gotten sick.
Have you had friends that have gotten COVID?
Yes, I have a lot of friends.
Me too.
And a lot of them have long. A lot of my friend had COVID. It wasn't that bad, and they got over it. But now they have arrhythmia that they didn't have before. Like it's an unwelcome guest, and it leaves a mess.
Yes. We just, I just produced this documentary on Trini Lopez, which is coming out at the end of this month.
Who hasn't?
Oh my God. He passed away of COVID.
I didn't. Yes. Yeah. I mean,
oh my God.
So tell people, just for the people to know, who is Trini Lopez?
So Trini Lopez was, the Rat Pack era.
Right.
And he opened, the Beatles opened for him in Paris, like in 63. He had a song, If I Had a Hammer, 60s pop music with a Spanish flair, adorable. And he was on all the variety shows and all the shows back then, a big Vegas performer. And he lived out in Palm Springs, and we were fascinated by him and his stories because he's the one guy of all the performers I've met that was friends with the Beatles, Elvis, and Sinatra.
Wow, that's a fascinating.
It is because there's groups and camps and and he could hang with all of them, and so we started to talk to him.
Touched every team, kind of.
Yeah, and Frank Sinatra assigned him to Reprise in '63. Frank's label, and so he did really well on that. So we thought, let's get a camera on you. Your stories are unbelievable. I mean, we want to hear about Beatles and Sinatra and Vegas back then. And documentary started to come together, and we're almost finished with him. And then I get the call that Trinidad's in the hospital. He caught COVID, and all we can do is pray for the best.
How old was he?
I think he was 84. So much has happened this past year. It's just hard to all, like we say, we lost last year. A lot of us feel like, what was last year? But look how much we've learned. You said you were a member of LA Conservancy. I mean, it really is something to get involved with. When anybody is listening, just go to LA Conservancy. And it's really just about signing petitions when something is up, for demolition.
Yeah, because it's not all you can, and I will say, because it does seem like there's nothing you can do to stop it once a developer sets his sights on something. And they want you to think that.
Yes.
But there are things you can do. And
you can stop it.
And I point to the May Company. I point to the Cinerama Dome. I point to the Beverly Cinema and Johnny's.
Yeah. I mean, look, they put the Bullwinkle statue back, on Sunset Strip. Like, where was that for 7 years? Like, was that just hiding in some studio?
I guess so.
And they really redid it beautifully and put it right there across from Tower Records. It's so weird because when you drive down that street, I see Book Soup, Bullwinkle, and Tower Records is still written on the side.
If one of these hotel geniuses wanted to bring people to LA, they would reopen Tower Records.
I know.
Just make it a one standing by the goddamn name.
Yeah.
Put some records in there and put it, recreate Tower Records from 1994 and watch people line up around the block to walk around it.
I mean, two things about that is that, God loved Colin Hanks, because when he did the Tower Records documentary, he painted that Tower Records logo
I didn't know it was
back on that building.
I didn't know
it wasn't original. I mean, the original Tower Records, it looks exactly the same. He replicated it, and it hasn't come down in 5 years. I can't imagine how many people are driving down Sunset and think it's really a Tower Records and pull in.
I didn't know that it was repainted. I just assumed that they never painted over it.
Yeah, Colin did that. But, I think...
Did they ever put anything in there?
No, it's like a pop-up every now and then.
Right. So there's it's like that space is just...
It's just empty.
Yeah.
And, back in when you would have dinner back in the day and we would finish around 9:00, we used to go to Tower Records and kill hours,
I would do shows at the Improv or the Laugh Factory, and in between shows, I would go to Book Soup and Tower Records and Tower Video.
Tower Video.
And kill time.
Yep.
Paul F. Tompkins used to work at Tower Video and kill time. And you'd be in Tower Records flipping through the bins, and you'd see people that had records in the bins, and they were also shopping at Tower Records.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I
think I saw everybody I've ever seen at Tower Records. Like, if anyone ever said to me who lives there, where do you see celebrities? I mean, Tower Records, Hamburger Hamlet. That's where you saw, or like Thrifty. Before it was CVS.
Yeah, I see people at Arts. I see more famous people at Arts Deli than any place else. Jerry's Deli closed.
I was just going to say that one. Yes.
Jerry's Deli closed. And now Amoeba closed on Sunset, but it's reopening on Hollywood. But will people go to Hollywood is the question.
They're going to have an exciting open, I think.
Are they going to have exciting parking? That's the question.
That I don't know. We'll have to see.
Because Sunset you could park at. You could always find a space.
That's the problem. But I think they're going to do it right. This is like a highly anticipated move. You know,
well, it's America's only record store.
Kind of wish I had gone to Tower Records. Wouldn't that have been amazing to take that location?
If you want to make Sunset Boulevard a destination, rebuild Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
And
put some of it back.
Yeah, put some of it back. I really, there's a reason that they don't let me make decisions like this. Like, no, we're going to put in the enormoplex. It's,
I think that the one we have to worry about is like the Viper Room. Now, I'm not going to say I go to the Viper Room as much as I used to, right?
Yeah.
But I like the fact that it's there because it had been so many incarnations.
It's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing.
It had been the Central. It had been Filthy McNasty's. It was the Melody Room. Filthy McNasty's. I don't know if you were here when that was there.
Of course.
Okay. It's like, what a name, right? And it's still like the marquee is still the same. And in the 50s, it was the Melody Room where like the gangsters hung out, and it still has the same stage. And there's something just old LA about it, and the ghosts in there. And and they're like, oh, we're going to build a hotel there. And so I was talking to the developer people. I know. So this developer, I don't even remember his name, but I had coffee with him. He didn't really understand anything I was saying. And he goes, well, we can just move it. And I go, you can't move it, right? So this is what happens. You build this luxury hotel that's like so out of control that nobody's going to go to, not a neighborhood place.
It looks like an explosion of glass.
Yeah. It's an explosion of glass. And they'll build like a Viper Room lounge to the side and charge you, bottle service. And that's not the same thing. I want the grittiness of that club. It still has that sort of old feel to it.
Yeah, it's not like it's not like the Hard Rock store and
right. It's the real deal. And everyone's performed there for 50, 60 years. You can't just move the stage, and they probably won't even put the stage in it. Anyway, those are the things that I am anticipating for the future of what can I say? What can I help save next?
Exactly.
We got to try. And the great thing about the Vintage LA community is that their voices can be heard. I have printed out threads, and I have brought them to conservancy meetings.
And so now is your thread, when you say, is that because I follow you on Instagram, is Facebook the really interactive
So Vintage LA, I'm Allison Martino, also known as Vintage LA on Instagram. And that's definitely there. And I post a lot of personal stories and stuff. Vintage Los Angeles on Facebook is all about the community of LA. So
that's what I get. Is there any dashes or dots or just Vintage Los Angeles?
Vintage Los Angeles.
Other podcasts reach for the sky. Dana Gould bound. We barely try.
This has been the Dana Gould Hour, brought to you by the Internet. Music by Andy Paley, with Jake Posner behind the board. Produced by Jeff Fox. Graphic design and web production by Spencer Hunt and Segan Friend. Sound editing and post-production by Jalinda Palmer and Joe Napolitano. Hey, if you like the show, why don't you drop us a line at show@danagould.com. Tom Kenny speaking.
I'm a DJ, I'm a DJ, I'm a person, I'm a person, I'm a singer, I love to sing and DJ. Boom! Peace out! You want